let's sing a little bit. Take this order that I've given you here, and let's turn to page 6. Here's some more copies of this right here. Thank you so much. Look at the dot option for the top of the page here. I like to think of this as a heartbeat. Usually when I lead Taizé, I'm totally out of sight, and you can control this kind of thing with your voice if it's mic'd. So I'll put an amen at the end or something of that nature. Look down right below.
Oh
talk a little bit. Very nice. I'm sure there's some people here, first of all, who participate in Taizé prayers before. Who's been involved in one? Any of you been in the community? Good. Taizé prayer is one that you explore at the surface first, and then it goes deeper and deeper and deeper in several kinds of ways. In the very back of this page, this program, I have a little outline of the community that I always put that gives some context to the work of the community. To summarize that briefly, it comes, I think one reason why it's interesting to look at Taizé is not because it's a fad or whatever. Obviously, it's an enduring presence since after World War II. But it instructs us as a way of gathering, for those that were here in the first hour, the way the assembly can be together in a different way. And it comes from a particular intentional Christian community. The two most prominent intentional communities that are found these days are Taizé and Hawn. They're not the only ones, but they certainly are the two most prominent ones. And they can inform our worship in a variety of ways. This community is a community of reconciliation. Started after World War II, in its intensity, it became a place, unwittingly really, because the brothers hadn't expected this, for young people all over Europe first to gather after the war to look for hope. Keeping in mind that this was a war-ravaged location on the face of the earth. And where is hope after all this destruction? It's one thing for the war to be over and for there to be a cessation of war, but where does hope come back? And so word got around that there were a handful of brothers gathering in this literally medieval little church. Parts of the church in the Taizé community go back to the 11th century. It has about a 6-second sound delay. So, several brothers sound like a Mormon tabernacle choir. They made this recording, we saw it perhaps alluded to earlier. It actually won some kind of prix to something in its classification in the religious album of the year of 1950s. The brothers singing in there. They used originally Jello kind of psalter and things of that nature. But then people started to visit them, especially on the weekends, and would crowd into this little church. And they were just young people. They were actually praying to discover what their mission was. They were a group of brothers that were ecumenical, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Reformed in the early years. So that was a different thing in and of itself. Still a monastic community, but centered much more in the Reformed sense of the word and ecumenical in spirit. As the brothers gathered, these young people started to join them. They were just mystified. Why would you want to come? This is really remote, southeast France. Cluny is nearby. Not exactly the most swinging town in the world, but Cluny is nearby. Cluny is where what we call modern monasticism, medieval monasticism started, in the sense with the Benedictine monastery there, and vestiges of that gigantic structure exist still in the town. You can see that. So there's a sort of a historical depth just by the nature of where it's located, but still this is like 20 minutes by bus from Cluny. Very isolated. The first time I went was almost 20 years ago, and I arrived in about the 17th of December. Just a couple of days. I've been in Africa for 6 months, and I was re-entering Western culture. So my wife hadn't been with me, so she was going to come and join me at Christmas. So I had a few free days, and I'll be with some monks. And so, it was cold. And the bus at that time didn't take you up, and it let you off on a road about close to a half mile away. You could see it. I'm loving my stuff, walking up there. Where am I? But welcome, and had a very good encounter, an initial experience with Taizé. Very welcoming place. They designed themselves then to be open to people from all cultures. They actually have a group of sisters, Catholic sisters, that have made it their mission to be the welcome team for the brothers to take that pressure off them And they process all the people who want to go on the web, those kind of things. But the overriding thing was this sense of reconciliation that still exists. Reconciliation among peoples, among cultures, among faith traditions. And how do you embody that? As Brother Roger would say, a parable of community. And in a sense, that's what all of our communities are. They're people that have different pasts. They're people that come from different faith traditions in many cases. They're people that have different political views. But how do we live in community versus a clique? That's the Christian assembly is a community, not a clique. And I think that's where its fullness is expressed. Not everyone is necessarily in lockstep, but yet we are brothers and sisters in Christ. Young people were searching, and so much to their surprise, they were engulfed by young people. So much so they had to build another church they thought would forever take care of their needs. They've added that church itself 4 times since then. And then in the high seasons, especially around Easter, they had to add tents to encompass as many as 8 or 10,000 people in this little village, kind of overwhelming. They had to design systems to feed people. They had all sorts of stuff that happened to show hospitality. But in a sense, there's the 3 prayers a day, before breakfast, before lunch, and then after dinner, are the points that kind of pull you together. If you spend any time in any kind of monastic community, you organize your life around prayer. I'll see you after morning prayer. I'll see you before evening prayer. It's the way I wish we could live our lives like it all the time. Maybe we could do more, you think. That was the idea, I think, of the village church. In medieval times, people stopping on the way to work or after work for mass or prayer or whatever, just kind of enfolding their lives. But then there's Bible study at regular days and discussion groups, but then a lot of the energy is built in the interaction of those who have come to be there at any given time. With young people, you really experience that. A lot of us are a little more standoffish about those things, but young people just... I took my daughter with my seminary students once, and she found a group of Italian boys, and kind of relaxed a little bit like this. And she was hanging out with those Italian guys all week, and it was really amazing. And so what was funny, I always do with my students a little closing Eucharist at the end. And so as we leave, and all my students, or whatever, they're free to invite friends they made throughout the week. So lots of times they'll invite the brother that did the Bible study, or they'll invite other people they met throughout the week. And we gather in the space, and so I asked my daughter to assist me. And these Italian guys, they're bunkers. The priest has a daughter. Actually, from their context in Italy. And I said, well, historically that's been the case quite often, but I didn't want to go there. It's the discussions there around meals, working together to keep the place clean. You actually do the work of cleaning the bathrooms, preparing the chapel, the grounds, all those kind of things yourself. And accommodation is very, very inexpensive. But it's designed for people under 30. They tolerate us in a certain way, not because they don't want us to come, they're older, but because it's hard for young people to really be themselves and be searching when there's a lot of older folks hanging around. I got permission to take most of my seminary students are over 30 and some are under. And I have to get special permission when I take them. And I always tell them, I says, now this is not the place to expound upon your last class in systematic theology. It's your place to listen. And it's not your place to instruct them. But when it's your turn, tell what you think, but listen more than you talk. It's really hard for seminary students here. But I can see why that's the issue in the community. So you organize around prayer. The services themselves are just an extension of the mission of the church, the prayer themselves. And we're talking about daily prayer. a pattern that a lot of us don't follow as much. We follow either a preaching service or a Eucharistic service, but most of us don't follow a daily prayer service. So it's another kind of alternative. And you can combine them with Eucharist, you can combine them with preaching, as we're doing at the midday hour here. But if you gather and do more than read Scripture and pray for the world, you've been in daily prayer. That's what it's for. It can be as short as 10 minutes, it can be longer. It's just sort of an anchoring place throughout the day. Those that practice a sevenfold or so monastic pattern of prayer, those are not long. They're very short. You don't get up, in the middle of the night and do a 2-hour service. It's a very short one. So they're kind of expand this three pattern. What they found out early on was that the Gelonel Psalter, while they really liked it, had two problems. It was very French, and they were reaching beyond France. And it was more esoteric than short-time visitors could absorb. They love to sing the Gelonel stuff still, and they will do it in the smaller seasons when there's not many people there. But when the crowds come in the summer, they tend to go to the patterns of music like you've seen, like we just did a little bit, that are more easy to absorb. How do you deal then with a multilingual group with multi-faith traditions or no faith at all? You leave silence and let God work through silence as opposed to dogma. This is always, most of my students are Methodists, but there's a variety of others as well, different traditions we take over, and this is the big shock. On Monday they're saying, oh, the silence is so long. It's usually between 5, 7, and 10 minutes, depending upon which time of the day. And then by Wednesday they're saying the silence is so short. The silence hasn't changed, but their understanding of how to use it has changed. Silence itself has a rhythm. As I've experienced it there's a kind of a settling in time. You hear people kind of shuffling and not moving a little bit and getting in good posture, wherever. And then there's this kind of deep silence where you can almost hear your heart beat. To experience that in community is really it's hard to describe. 300 people in a room, you can't hear anything except your own breathing. And then there's an anticipation once you get into the rhythm of kind of moving from the silence into the prayer, which is usually what follows. Very powerful. You hear the word, and then you have to wrestle with God yourself. And Brother Roger talks a lot about in his books and other contexts about what it means to pray. How do I pray? How do I pray? And I would say it's almost closer, rather than trying to shape words and to shape in different forms, it's almost closer to a almost Buddhist sense of just trying to be and see where God comes and invades that space where you are, rather than try to force something to happen. There's a lot of visual elements. For those of you in the last session, it's a high context. Incense you can smell when you come in, lots of icons and candles, beautiful space, places to meditate, sound of water from a little indoor fountain, a baptismal remembrance. Those kind of things pervade the space. And of course the sound of singing itself. No one's up front, except on Sunday morning. There is a Mass. And I must say, for me personally, not everyone feels this way. Disappointing is not the word, but I felt like I've been in this sort of ecumenical, not above culture, but cross-cultural experience. And then Sunday morning feels like a French Mass. I have nothing against going to a French Mass, but it seems provincial after the whole week of being, in such a prayer mode. But there is, in the mornings, there's blessed elements that are shared with no great thanksgiving or no rite spoken. They're simply shared with people who wish, during the singing of one of the songs, come forward and take the elements. that isn't something that's common to a lot of our traditions, pre-blessed bread and elements. But that's it's really been interesting, because when I've done it with my communion with my students, one of the brothers comes in, he says, "Oh, would you also mind blessing this bread for the kind of the irony of recovering Baptist blessing bread for a semi-Catholic." What the heck? I like that kind of word. I think God can handle it if I can get over it. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of and some of the essential elements. I've been to a number of Taizé prayers in the States. And let me start with some anomalies that I found that I think are a bit of a problem in the spirit of Taizé. One of them is over-controlling the performance or the presentation of the music. What I like to do is to usually gather in a balcony or out of sight, someplace in the back, with a handful of instruments. I love a cello. The cello just grounds it wonderfully. Maybe a flute, an oboe, or a violin, or all those. That pretty much is all I need. A couple of cantors, if I need some addition myself. I usually play a little of this. And then the instrument that really is preferred, they use a keyboard, but they really would like a classical guitar. Back, I don't know now, it's been, let's see, I went in '89, and I think the next time I came back was about, so I think somewhere in the early 90s, a woman, after the Rhine Curtain came down from Eastern Europe, came and she was a classical guitar player. She spent the whole summer. And she started to play for the prayers, using a kind of a kind of an arpeggiated classical technique. And they loved it because it moved the prayers along without coercing. It kept the rhythm and it kept the pitch. They did a lot of work a cappella when it was in the low season. And of course, a cappella work tends to sag and get slower and slower. And so they loved it. She left, they really missed it. So they were trying to figure out how to handle this. So they found a CD-ROM for a keyboard that had to use a guitar thing, but they didn't like the sound of it all. It wasn't like her at all. So they actually brought her back and recorded her sounds and then used those with CD-ROM. When I came back the second time they were doing this, it was out of sight. There was no keyboard in sight. It was back behind something. But I heard the sounds. I thought it was a classical guitar. But I listened and I realized they were keyboard idioms, not guitar idioms, because of how the chords were formed. And it just really keeps the prayer going. A piano can be used, but a piano has to be played very carefully. It's just a little too percussive. It feels coercive slightly. I don't find, usually, with a few exceptions, organ being very successful. It's two block chords. And this needs some. And you can kind of do that with some organs, but it takes a very good organist to play a really good Taizé service. Block chords just don't have that sense of motion in the same way. I've heard one organist that does this very well in Dallas, but as a whole, I would say it's much better to use a kind of classic arpeggiated guitar style, or a keyboard that can simulate that, harp or something of that nature. So that's one of the things. The other thing, when I have this group of instrumentalists with me, we lots of times people have brought in some very good instrumentalists, which is great. And they say, "What are we going to play?" I said, "You see it right there? When I point to you, I want you to start playing that. But I'll just wait till I point to you. And then when I stop you, when I give you a little sign, when you finish that part, just face it out. I bring someone else in. I don't give them a lead sheet that says, now, you're going to play in the first and third times, and you're going to... I couldn't pray with that. Plus, it's just not the spirit of it. So I listen to how the congregation's singing along. I'll bring one instrument in. I'll put a phase out another instrument. We all are out of sight, and they get very used to it very quickly. And it works beautifully. Now, if you're overly anal retentive, then this is not your format. But you can, high school players, I work with them. They know when they're supposed to play, or what they're supposed to play. They just watch for me to give them a simple sign. And my goal is, on the cyclic material, especially like Blessed Lord and those kind of things we just did earlier, is that no two cycles will really be quite the same. People may be singing the same thing, but by what's canted above, by what's played, that they all have little variations. And that is what really creates interest in, I think, in this kind of structure, whether it's Taizé music or African music or other kinds of cyclical structures.
You just add rhythm to both all the dives, all that.
Yeah, sometimes I use the ones that are there, but then sometimes I just add it. I picked it up in Africa, and so I just will Africanize Taizé, not in sound, but in terms of technique. Yeah. One of the things I have a problem with, having worked a lot with cyclic structures in other cultures, is people that sing over the ends of phrases and glue them together. Taizé, the earlier ones tend to match the phrase length. It's hard to hear it, and even match the rhythm somewhat. It's like a descant. I like descants that go over the ends of phrases that have a different rhythm than the melody. Some people write descants that coincide with the melodic rhythm and stuff. And so I started using it. And I noticed in more recent descants they're starting to use those techniques of different rhythms from the melody and over phrase lengths. You hear them better. So that's just a little something I picked up in Africa that works well. So sometimes I'll sing scripture over the top. Sometimes there's a lot you can control this way. And by the way, this is not what's done here. This is sort of my way to get Americans going on today. Let's go back to Bless the Lord, and I'll show you the kind of thing. Let's go to another. Jesus remember me, which is 4. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me. When a group is accustomed to it, I can be, especially with what you go over the last measure, it signals you're going back. This is an oral tradition technique. It signals you're going to go back. And then if I sing it softer, and groups are used to this, they sing softer. If I sing it louder, they sing louder. Or if I do ooh, they just simply ooh. It's kind of an oral tradition technique that works quite well for groups that get adjusted to it. And if you work with your choirs and clue them into what's going on, the congregation will follow very easily. Such a thing. Another problem I've encountered then is leaving out the intercessory prayer. It seems strange, but that's the whole heart of daily prayer. You can leave out intercessory prayer and just sing a bunch of songs, and this is the point. So the section on page 4 as follows. In this case, I've used one from the Russian Orthodox liturgy. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй. Try it. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй. Can I have the choir continue? Do the choir. Eternal God, you created us in your image, and you saved us through your Son, Jesus. Look with compassion upon the entire human family. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй. It's said to them, you hum, the choir hums, and people get the idea they go along with it. Very little instruction. I give the instruction to the choir, put them out among the people, and they know what to do, and then people just pick it up by virtue of what they're doing. Meditation and heavy instruction don't work so well together. Once in a while I do something perhaps, but not too often. You can see that is central to it. Some kind of intercessory prayer. The other thing I find is a problem is using only the ostinato forms like Jesus Remember Me. There are several structures that are used. For example, we use the canon at the end. I like to use a couple of canons usually for variety. And then usually some responsorial form. For example, on page 3, the response at the top is not in this case, an ostinato. That's a response to after every couple of measures of Psalm 120. Then we sing that like a little refrain or antiphon. So you basically have 3 major structures: antiphon or response structure, canon, and then the ostinato repeated. I think those add a lot of variety to the prayer and keep it from being just the same. A lot of songs sung a lot of times.
You just had it one.
Yeah, 3 structures. At the top there, the use of response or antiphon structure. Like in a psalter, you have a response. Then the ostinato, which is the most famous form of Taizé, where you sing 8 measures so over and over again. And then canons. So making sure you have a diversity of each of those in the prayers is very important. Then let's go ahead and rehearse the one we're going to use for lunch today at the prayer, page 5. Prepare the way for the whole thing. The harmonic pattern is repeated over and over to accommodate the words as they change, but it really it has repetition, but it accommodates the text itself. And this has become a very standard piece. Sung mostly in English when I've been there, sometimes in German or French, because there's other versions of it, but mostly in English, especially when there's a lot of English-speaking visitors. This will often be used at the end of the prayer. So closing off the prayers with the Lord's Prayer. It can be spoken, it can be like we did yesterday, we just intoned it on one pitch. Lots of ways. I prefer to have something like that sung. Singing that, some way, even in one pitch, gives a sense of unity that sort of speaking, mumbling doesn't quite do. It's more intentional. You breathe better. There's a sense of the community saying a little bit more strongly. So I'm all for singing it when possible. And then it's hard to notate this kind of music. It really isn't, Our Father in heaven, holy be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. It's got to have a lot more give and take. And I like it. I like the idea of these petitions kind of rushing to the next. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. It's flowing back and forth. So let's try it, as they say some places, without the music. A cappella. enjoyed it. A space like we'll be in, at noon is a one-time space with a little bit of resonance. And once again, if the choir knows this, the congregation picks it up very easily. This is one piece, though, if it's not been used by the group before, I tend to have a rehearsal on this, because otherwise it goes by very quickly.
Do they have songbooks?
They have songbooks, and they're special ones with lots of languages in them. And then there's little numerical things in the corner that just kind of indicate what page you turn to next when you need it. It's kind of like some churches have a little digital system. Your baby's number 54 and is crying. Can you come to the nursery? It's just they're just often placed around the church, and you just look up and there it says, Psalm 33. You turn to it, you start to sing.
Does everyone sing in their own language?
Some do, but they don't have the problem we have. Many of those are multilingual people, and so even if they don't know technically all the words, lots of times they'll still sing in another language. And so it tends to be in the language that's selected by the cantor, or the original language of the piece. So if that's Latin, or if it's French, or if it's Catalan, a certain kind of Spanish, or if it's Italian or whatever, they tend to sing in the language of the original language of the piece. There's always either a free translation, at least, or sometimes a singing translation, which it's hard to get good singing translations that are totally accurate, and fit word outs and things like that. So you hear some polyglot singing, but most of it's, simultaneously, but most of it's polyglot sequentially throughout the service. Obviously, when I'm adapting to a situation over here, I tend to go with English, Spanish, and Latin. Like the Russian ones in that kind of case. Once in a while, I'll use Russian. However, at my seminary community, my singers may have a Korean, or they may have some others, and so the choir can do it in Korean, but it's a little hard for the congregation to pull that one off. But or I'll have a scripture lesson read in Korean or in Spanish. Depends on who's in the community. Usually, then the other thing for the language, there's the actual complete lesson, but they usually have pretty short passages. So I might have the complete lesson read in English, but then sort of the kernel of it read in 3 or 4 other languages by different people in the community, and you hear those sounds. So that's the way it usually happens over here. Let's look at 2 things: the structure of the service itself, and then how Taizé can play into existing liturgies that you would have when you're not doing a formal Taizé service. It's very simple. Basically, you have preparation and singing. You hear the word, you respond to the word, you prepare for the silence, you have the silence, you have the prayers, and the Lord's Prayer, and then you sing as long as you want the end. It's not a complicated structure. That can expand as need be, or it can contract. It can expand into an hour prayer, it can contract into a 15-minute prayer. By how much you add at the beginning, how much you add at the end. One of the interesting things about Taizé liturgy there, unlike the ones here that I do, the singing goes on a long time, and people stay as long as they want or they leave. One time I said, I'm going to stay at the very end. And it was a 2-hour. When finally someone else was leaving at the very end, it wasn't just me, it was like 2 hours. Otherwise, it would have been about an hour when most people left. When I do services here, people, we all kind of leave at the same time, except I've noticed people don't want to disturb the silence. They'll often just sit for a long time. In the shape of the week, then, as you move toward Friday, the cross itself becomes more important. So there's almost a sense of Good Friday vigil on Saturday night, in a lyrical kind of way. So the cross is actually taken and placed among the people face down on Good Friday, and people come and using various postures, pray before the cross. Some kneel and put their forehead on one of the limbs of the cross. Some touch it in some other way. Some just lie flat. There's all sorts of prayer postures around the world. It's very interesting to see that. Some just kneel in front of it and spend some time like that. And then on Saturday, then the cross is erect again, and people all receive a candle, kind of like Christmas Eve. They have these wonderful tapers there that don't have any wax, that and they're real thin. And then you usually sing about the Lord is my light and salvation at a certain point or something like that, and all the candles are lit, and you have a little sense of the Easter Vigil at that point.
So there's structures then in that sense?
What's that?
And what part of the structure is that in?
That would, after the prayers,
After the prayer.
they would tend to, the candle would be lit and that kind of thing. And during the silence is when people approach the cross, but anytime after that, when the singing continues, people can approach the cross anytime. I've used the cross in a couple of services. There's one United Methodist event some years ago in Houston, and a big cross was available, and they brought it in. And that was so different. I had to kind of have a moment of teaching about, well, what should we do with this? Most of us don't have big crosses lying on the floor in our church. So I just talked about possible ways to do it and approach it. And I wasn't sure what would happen. Just an invitation. You can't mandate people. Go to that cross. And so it was very interesting. The silence came. And, I don't, at least kind of open-ended things. What happens, happens. I'm not there to make people do anything. So the first one out was an 11-year-old boy. And by the time the prayer was over, you could hardly find a place to put your little finger on the cross. It was surrounded. I think those postures and things are things we need. It calls sometimes for a different space than what we might do. Our sanctuaries may or may not be the best spaces for this. The use of candles, very important. The use of icons and symbols of faith. Sometimes when I've done it with youth, we made our own icons. And that's been very powerful. Own representations of Christ as a part of the experience. It's great the church I served in Raleigh for a number of years, this was a Bach Brahms church. And the choir could not get into this. I don't think I introduced it well. I introduced it as a part of choir rehearsal as something we were going to do. I should have introduced it in retreat. But their idea was, well, there's not anything to this music. You sing it once, you got it. What else is there? I got it, that kind of thing. They didn't get the meditation idea. So I went to the young people, the youth choir. And this time I talked about the community and how it works and the whole idea of reconciliation. They were into the mysticism of the whole thing. Planned the whole thing for the congregation. The scripture was read in about 5 or 6, 7 languages, whatever they were studying in school. And they found the Bible in that language and read from it. And then the church got it. And then there was no problem. What was going on? And the young people leading the way, but they really got that mysticism. They created their own icons. Various traditions have, still have some trouble with icons and things like that. So, but I think the idea of visual points of meditation, whatever those might be for you, are important. And then the candles really add this mystical kind of feel to it. Those really are the essential items. Now, in terms of some of you that are used to Taizé in worship itself, in a regular ongoing liturgy, how do you use Taizé in those situations?
Well, we had it once. I have to say, I'm a brand new pastor. The transition, she's been there a year now. She had, as I told you, one Wednesday is global service, one is Taizé, one is gospel, and one is praise. Mm-hmm. And so I had to jump right in with your help to try to, without a lot of knowledge, do a Taizé service every month. She is really wonderful about what I'm listening to you, the icons, the candles, the whole way it's set up. I'm just so envious. I don't play the guitar, which that's what I wish I could do.
A keyboard, a little electronic keyboard works really better than I think it
more arpeggio sounds, and I do pull that.
What about on Sunday morning? Are you using Taizé on Sunday morning?
We have not.
Any of you tried that?
I use it in communion, during communion.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to connect this to a very traditional, old world style of church or worship. And to keep it fresh, this, always looking for something to energize. But it really did work. I didn't have a lot of confidence to bring congregation in. But the use of the choir and small voices and instruments.
Communion is a very good way. In some of your traditions, you may process forward. This is great. No one has to have a book. And there's something beautiful about a singing procession in the church. You just sort of this cloud of witnesses comes forward, And I won't go off on this right now, but one of my soapboxes is only the use of funereal organ during communion. I think it really isn't Eucharist then. Our liturgies have changed. It doesn't say Christ has died, Christ has died, Christ has died. It says Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. And we're forgetting about the Christ has risen part. And that singing is good. There are, if you have a distribution pattern, singing still works well. But you don't have to have a book in your hand. Let me get her to come in.
We do use Taizé music in our service. When we come to the period of prayer, it's a traditional service, we use a Taizé song and it changes before and after
Good.
the prayer.
Good.
During Advent, we would use, instead of the organ prelude or some other instrument, the Wait for the Lord, sung over and over.
It's a great gathering thing to do.
Yes.
Actually have a mini Taizé prayer at the beginning, about 10 minutes or so of people. Those are really good ideas. One of the things I've noticed about round prayers is very effective. Sometimes I've seen a problem where it's treated like the stanza of a hymn in the older pattern, of the 1960s and 70s. We'll take a prayer hymn stanza and sing it. And this needs to be sung several times, I think, to really allow people to. I bet my heartbeat slows down.
We vary how many times we do.
Yeah, I'd at least give it. Usually at first when I do an American, service, people aren't used to repetition, and 6 or 7 times is a lot. When I did it in Africa, I tried to stop it after about 15, and they weren't done yet. I lost count after 35. Say, just let me know when you're finished, though. But they're used to living with these kind of structures. Someone else had a hand up over here.
We use it during the healing rite.
Very good. I would say gradually move it so that it's a congregational piece as well. Invite them to do it with familiarity, and it can happen.
Ours is congregational.
Yeah. So various possibilities.
Did you speak to sources and copyright and
Yeah. OneLicense.net is the one you need to use, and GIAmusic.com has more books than you can take a stick at. Actually, I have some Taizé sources. For those of you that were not in the first session, I have some. There's a lot of stuff on this thing, but there's Taizé stuff, so I just kind of pass it around. If you had one for the first session, okay. Thanks a lot.
One thing you said, you put your choir into the congregation.
I tend to, yeah. I
Would that
tend
be
to,
a,
and I tend to put. I like to put them in pairs so they feel more confident. To sing the alto part and sing the whatever. For example, we've worked out in advance. We're going to complete humming here, or they know what's going to happen, and without them instructing, you can achieve that kind of flow without calling attention to itself. Sometimes we're separate. If I have a balcony, sometimes I'll put the choir in the balcony. And that's what I'll happen. One other feature that's often overlooked is in the front of the little books that you have for Taizé, they'll say, use something from your own local tradition. And oftentimes I do that. When you're over there, the local tradition, my students go here to Lent. And when I'm over there, then the local tradition is a German chorale, Lenten chorale, or a French psalter piece or something. That's their local tradition of the church. But I've done them in various groups, from Baptist to whatever, African, different ones. And I try to find a song. For example, I used What Wondrous Love Is This in one. I've used Amazing Grace. I used a South African Kyrie when I was in South Africa. And so in some place, maybe in the end or in the gathering time, a song that's familiar to the people that fits the mood, fits the theme and mood. And I sometimes do somewhat thematic ones. What you see before you is just one I've used recently, and it's each fall until the war's over, I'm going to run on peace. It's been quite a while, we're still doing prayer on peace. But that's the nature of the Christian experience. And so the song, everything is chosen is geared around, is around peace in some way, still keeping the structure of Taizé. So it's possible to do, sort of thematic ones in a pretty lyrical sense. I wouldn't say it's the kind of thing like the lectionary of the day, and you find the Taizé song that matches that. It's not quite oriented that way because the music serves more of a function in the flow of the prayer than it does the thematic link up. But sometimes there are places that you can do that. They do respond to the big seasons of the Christian year. You find more crossings during Lent. You find, resurrection responses during Easter, things of that nature, or Pentecost. There are those that fit in the flow of the Christian year, but not so much for a specific lectionary of the day. So one of the things that you mentioned was so good. I think if you're looking, I think it really is important in congregations to have some midweek alternative kind of experiences for gathering. I must say, I sort of miss in my tradition. We had a midweek prayer service with singing. We had a Sunday evening service that served a different function. Sunday morning was hymns, and Sunday evening was gospel songs. And we're down to one, for most of us now. We've talked about the one in her congregation, and rather than saying my only alternative service is going to be praise and worship service, you've established a pattern with 4 different ones, and actually you can have 4 different teams, and it's not such an oppressive thing, to guide those. Those are very important, both for the sense of the continuity of prayer, midweek prayer, and how it brings certain people together, even if it's not large. I think it's also really important for cultivating experience for people who would be afraid to be lectors in the big service, or young people or children that can take roles in these services and gradually be pulled into it. And then they become a source of energizing your larger services as some of those songs are brought in and some of those experiences. You try them out with certain groups. So I think a 21st century pattern, in my estimation, is not to go to my alternative service is going to be a single praise and worship service. I think there's different ways to explore different patterns. And I don't think it has to be a logistical nightmare if you have people that say they do once a month, a certain one. It's a lot easier than what it takes to maintain some others. The more Pentecostal derived praise and worship service could be one of those. But I don't think it has to be the only one. And I think you find people responsive. You'll find some extremely faithful people that will not miss this. Some use a healing service as even a weekly occurrence. In different traditions. Any other experiences with that kind of thing in your churches? Try on.
Well, we have what we call world